Right, hello. So we'll get started. Welcome to our lunchtime lecture for June. My name is Leanne Melbourne, and I'm the Events and Communications Manager here at the Linnean Society. So firstly, we aren't expecting the fire alarms to go off, but if they do, please exit the way you came, turn right into Piccadilly, and then right again into Burlington Arcade, and just wait there while we make sure that everyone is out of the building. And if you're looking for the toilets, they are downstairs, and there is a ladies on the way up to the library where we'll be serving tea later. So, welcome to today's lunchtime lecture, titled Plants of the Qur'ān and Other Religious Texts, Preserving Cultural History in a Changing World, with Dr. Shahina Ghazanfar. Dr. Shahina Ghazanfar is a research associate at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, in the Directorate of Science. She's also a fellow of the Linnean Society and was elected in 2003. Her expertise lies in the vegetation, biogeography, and conservation of the floras of the Middle East, in particular that of the Arabian Peninsula. She has extensive knowledge on plants of medicinal and economic importance and those of saline environments of the Arabian Peninsula. She advises regularly on native plants with potential to horticulture and using native plants for restoration of degraded landscapes. So today, Shahina will reflect on how religious texts are important in preserving plants and their cultural history and values. So thank you, Shahina.
Thank you very much. So I'm very sorry to have kept you waiting. I mean, I'm suffering very badly from pollen today for all the days. And I hope I can make the talk concise enough to fit in with your times. So I'll be talking about the plants of the Qur'an and other religious texts. I've been researching on this subject for quite some time. And this particular talk basically aims at preserving religious texts as a form of preserving the culture that is associated with plants. To start with, there are about 75 plants that are mentioned in the Quran and in the Hadith put together. Fewer in the Quran, just about 22, 50 or so in the Hadith. Hadiths are basically narrations collective from when the Prophet Muhammad was alive, and his followers, his companions, put together what he said about the plants, what he said about his life, and that is known as the Hadith. Hadith was written about 200 years. The first Hadith was compiled, which is of some authenticity, was compiled 200 years after the death of the Prophet. Now, most of the plants that are mentioned in either the Hadith or the Quran, they have some sort of a use. But as we come down, 13 of those plants are food plants, very common ones like the date palm, olive, grape, etc. And the remaining 7 are just used, or they are there basically for some characteristics that they have in that environment, or for some of them I have not been able to fully identify, and I always give some sort of alternative names. Now, I should say that while researching on these plants, I have been in touch with Jewish scholars, people who can read the older cuneiform texts, and as well Christian bishops, so that I could get together as much information as I could about these plants that are mentioned in the Abrahamic religions. I will skip through these because I think most of us do know that the domestication and the cultivation of plants started a long time ago, and it is not surprising that these plants that were fairly common in the Middle Eastern region, where most of the scriptures are written and other religious, of all the religions, they were quite familiar with these plants. And these plants were not extraordinary or odd plants. They were everyday, useful plants. And this slide just basically shows how long that these connections or trade was there with many of the regions of the Middle East, including some parts of India and even as far as China. When the movement of plants started to happen, there was this sort of gardens started to be established. And one of the first ones that we have documentation of is in Egypt, or was the gardens almost about 3,000 years ago. And this was a funerary garden. These were not pleasure gardens, but gardens which were attached to temples. A better documentation is that of a garden in Nineveh. Nineveh, of course, as you might now consider it, it's very close to Jabal Sinjar, just not very far from there. And that was associated with Sennacherib quite a long time ago, almost about 2,500 years ago. And this garden was extremely well designed. It had a very good watering system, the Archimedes screw watering system, and it had plants from more or less all over, at least in the region, in the Middle Eastern region. And there are very good records of it, which are found on cuneiform texts, as shown around in below. Of course, China is no less, and the first, I suppose one could say, the proper botanic gardens were set up during the Han Dynasty, or during the Han Empire, where Emperor Wu Ti sent his people around to collect plants, bring them back, and China is regarded as one of the countries, basically, during this empire, to domesticate things like coriander, walnut, and several other plants, which were, of course, growing around, but they were not as well domesticated as they were during his empire, during his rule. And as you can see in the lower part of this slide, through the legendary Silk Road, which sort of is spanned all the way from Heian to the Red Sea, mainly, there was a whole migration or people walking across it in some form or another, and trade existed together with that of the plants. So coming to some of the plants that are mentioned in the Quran, one of the ways of looking at it, I thought would be quite good to have a look at some of the traditions that we have and some of the paintings that belong to that tradition. This is quite a famous one which is found or present in the British Museum, and it is of Bilqis, or the Queen of Sheba. Queen of Sheba was invited by King Solomon from the land of what is now Jordan, and she was sent a hoopoe, which you can see sitting on the acacia tree right at the edge. Do we have a pointer? Is this a pointer? Yeah. And how about just over here? And I started to look at the plants that are shown on this painting. One of them is Acer, which is under which Sheba is reclining. And it is meant with restraint and constraint, some sort of a retirement or constraint. So she's kind of reposing. I mean, she's sort of relaxed under this. The iris, which is given right over here, is something which comes up quite often in Persian paintings. And this is basically for faith, wisdom, and a friendship. The Elsie, or the hollyhock, which is next to it, shows ambition and aspiration. And the acacia, it shows platonic love or concealed love. So I think what the artist is saying in this picture is all being depicted by plants. Now, the hoopoe over here is bringing the message, and it kind of gives some sort of an impression that Bilqis wanted to go there. Bilqis was very much inspired to go and visit King Solomon. Another of our shared legends is that of Jonah and the whale. Now, this is done by Ryder and is present at the American Art Museum in the Smithsonian. Doesn't show any of the plants, and all what it shows is Jonah over here and the big whale with huge big eyes being swallowed right over here. But in the picture below, or in the illustration below, there is a little bit more plant life over there, and this shows that Jonah is being vomited out or expelled out of the whale's mouth. And the plant that is associated with it is normally ricinus, or a gourd plant. Both of them are kind of correct. The Quran mentions more the ricinus. It's a plant called yaktin. In Hebrew, or in the Torah, it's called kikion. And they have translated it as ricinus. I have translated it more like a gourd. But if you look at the painting over here, these leaves do not look like either ricinus leaves or gourd, and the gourd one are also palmately lobed. So the accuracy of paintings is not something to depend upon. Here is another one, which is in the National Gallery in Edinburgh. It is of the Holy Family, done by Raphael, early 15th, 16th century. And if you look at the tree, and it is actually called the Holy Family with a palm tree, and one would think the palm tree as the date palm, which was the most common palm in this region. But the palm tree over here is actually a fan palm, not sure which one it may be. And by the feet are strawberry plants. And of course, there's nothing like that or of that nature which would grow anywhere in Israel or in Palestine. So, as I said earlier, one of the ways to preserve the plants, to preserve the culture that is associated, is to go to the scriptures. They will not change for quite a long time, at least not readily. And they have been there for over 2,000 or 3,000 years. And it is quite a good way of looking at the, not just the flora, but other means as well, and to associate, because plants are normally associated with a certain culture from which they originate. And therefore, it is quite important to get. It's fairly easy to cultivate a plant, bring it out of its original habitat, but there's always a certain culture that is associated with the plant in its natural habitat. And we will see that in one of the examples that I give you. So I will take just the 3 examples, depending upon time. The first one is date palm. In the context of the Qur'an, it is mentioned as food. It is mentioned to be enjoyed. It's providing shade, as it's also mentioned in the Bible. Mary sat underneath it when she was having or giving birth to Jesus. It symbolizes wisdom, and it is suggested to be conserved. When Islam started to spread, one of the things that was noted down in the scriptures or amongst the hadiths was that the generals of the army were told not to destroy the palm groves when they came and conquered the villages, because that was the plant that was going to give them the sustenance and the food that they needed. So it suggested some sort of conservation. And it was, of course, a source of fiber. A lot of construction and clothes, sacks, mats were made of that. In the Bible, it symbolizes holiness, because Jesus was, Mary was shaded by that. It is given some sort of reference to resurrection, to justice, to righteousness, to honor, and also it is a basis of many geographical names that are found in old Palestine area. So this is a village of 7 palms or a village of 30 palms. And it was, of course, one of the first trees to be domesticated, and there is rock art in Saudi Arabia dating back to about the Bronze, about 10,000 years from present, and they do show, this rock art shows date palms with people climbing on it to get the dates. This was a place where there was a lake. The lake doesn't exist anymore, but there was a lake at one stage where the date palms grew. Date palm, of course, being extremely important in this region, was on the coins. And the first one that we have an example of, it's again in the British Museum, is that which was minted in 700 AD in Palestine. And of course, the gravestones are given the fronds, the palm fronds, because it is believed that they can ascend to paradise or at least rest peacefully in the shade of the palm. The date palm in the hadith is quite different. It is a fruit that is liked. It is, do not eat raisins and dates together. I suppose it's too much of a sugar. It's to break your fast with dates. And there are many, many rules which regulate how the dates should be pollinated. And these are things which are given in the hadith. In the medicine of the Prophet, which is a part of the hadith taken out and relates only to those plants which have a certain medicinal use. In that, it says it's beneficial for mouth, gums, and stomach. And when it says it has a humor of cold and dry, it is following the old humoral subscription of Aristotle, where everything was either cold or dry or wet and cold and dry, these four humors. It is also beneficial for the liver. It clears sore throat, considered as a food, a drink, a medicine, and as well as sweet. So amongst the medicines, it had quite a wide range of use. Coming to a second plant, which is the grape, anab. In the Quran, it is considered as a blessing. It is mentioned, with the rain, the grape will come out. So it is a blessing which comes with God, or God gives us. It is also associated with wisdom, good thinking, enjoyment, and abstinence from intoxication. It just says that in the Quran. It is not banned in the Quran, as many of the Muslims do believe. Context in the Bible is associated, the most widely associated plant. It is mentioned 250 times where references given in the Bible. And many times as a drink, many times as a fruit to be had either as dried raisins or fresh, and many times as a phenology. When is the time for it to be pruned? When is the time to cut the wines? When it is the time to harvest? In the hadith, it is associated with wisdom, enjoyment, good thinking, keeping away from intoxication, and a blessing of abundance. So all good things are mentioned in the hadith. In the medicine of the Prophet, it says coughs and pains with the kidney, bladder, it strengthens the stomach, spleen, it's really good for memory, and it is good for the inflammation and for stomach aches. So it is quite a beneficial plant to have. The beginning of domestication of the grapes started quite a long time ago, 6,000 to 8,000 years, and there are records of it being domesticated in Georgia. And after that, it spread out westwards into Europe. So it's an old plant, a very, very old fruit. And of course, there are lots of murals and frescoes in Egypt and in Mesopotamia where it has been shown the harvesting, the making of wine, it being carried away, even all the way to China, where from Bactriana, Sogdiana, these are all the places which are now Central Soviet, Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, all the Tans areas, Central Asian, and they were producing wine and it was being carried. The Chinese had a special instrument, a special drinking object in which they drank the wine. Pomegranate is the other one, and an extremely beautiful plant. And in the Quran, it is always used as a blessing. It's a symbol of paradise, simply because the flowers are so beautiful. The fruit carries so many different, so many seeds, and therefore it's always a symbol of excessiveness, to have abundance, really. But it is also an example not to be excessive or wasteful. And in the Quran says that when you're harvesting it, make sure you share. It is a symbol or a reference is made to sharing, and that becomes not from the fruit itself, but it is a symbol of sharing. In the Bible, it is one of the 6 species of land, or the earth, and the reference to it is made of the beauty of women, cheeks like pomegranate. It, of course, is referred to as the skirt of Solomon was decorated with pomegranates as well. Not very much in the hadith this time, apart the reference is made to its flowers and to the juice. And in the medicine of the Prophet, the juice is good for the stomach, it's for the throat, chest, very good for the lungs, and with a little bit of honey, it cleanses the eyes, and it's smeared on the gums. It is very good for to preventing gum decay. So pomegranate being a very old and ancient fruit, and at the time of the Zoroastrians, which was before the Muslims came into a very old civilization in Persia, it was always considered as a symbol of eternal life. It was a symbol of strength in the Persian culture, fertility, prosperity, righteousness, and the Jewish ancient Egyptians, they put pomegranates in the burials. And Prophet Muhammad believed it to purge the body and spirit of jealousy and hate. And it's always been considered as a blessing, a symbol of paradise, and not to be excessive and wasteful. I think, do we have time for olive? Can we just have just 5 minutes for the olive? The final of the 4 of the 6 earth plants, as they're mentioned. Olive, again, is known to us. And again, in the context of the Qur'an, it bears light, and that comes from its oil, of course. It's a very blessed and a useful tree. It's mentioned several times as a blessed tree and as a useful tree. In the Bible, it is a symbol of peace, as righteousness and integrity. In the Hadith, very similar to the Quran, it's a blessed tree, it's a symbol of peace, and it's also, of course, used medicinally. Olive oil in the medicine of the Prophet, it was mentioned as beneficial if you were poisoned. It loosens the stomach, expels worms, and of course, topically, it softens your skin and delays whitening of hair. So take note of that. Olive, of course, is one of the most classical trees of the Mediterranean, and fossils which go back to 37,000 years have been found in Santorini in Greece, and I have a few pictures of that. Of course, it was known amongst the Egyptians and laid down in Tutankhamun's tomb. Amongst the Greeks, it always showed some sort of a glory and peace, and it has always been considered as a sacred plant amongst much of the European nations. The cultivation, together with grape, fig, and olive, they're amongst one of the oldest groups of plants which have founded horticulture. Olive trees, of course, began about 7,000 years ago, and they were cultivated in Crete, known to be at least 3,000 years. In Palestine and in the Jordan Valley, carbonized stones have been found dating back to 3,500 years. And olive has always been considered as a symbol of peace, wisdom, and glory. And it's one of the first plants that is mentioned in the Bible, brought as a branch brought to Noah. So that's all that I'm going to talk to you about. Thank you, and I have kept much on time. Thank you.